This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board here. I hope you've had a great week. By the time you hear this, I will have completed my research that I'm hoping to do, weather permitting, on using the Burrow RX on Columbian ground squirrels. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. So I've done some work on Richardson's with the Burrow RX. I don't make any money off the Burrow RX. Companies ship me one for my day job, and so I'm able to kind of do some work with it, and just testing it out in some of the species we have here in Montana to try to get some data on efficacy rates. But in any event, I'm glad to have you on board here. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and hit the bell so that you can be sure to get updates on when new material has been added. I tend to publish once a week. Also, if you're interested, I'm always looking for individuals who want to get interviewed. Perhaps you have a product or a service that you wanted to advertise to the wider community. It doesn't cost you anything. It's sort of free advertising. One of my goals is to get more information out to the public, because I think this is a creative industry and communication is difficult. So you can definitely reach out to me. How do you reach me? At wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. If you have comments, suggestions for the show, definitely reach out to me. And of course, even criticisms, by all means, you can pass that along as well. And here's my website. If you have some interest in getting some books, we have them here. And of course, you can purchase them in a variety of areas. I am presently revising this one, the Vertebrate Pest Handbook. It'll be the 3rd edition. So I'm hoping to get that banged out before the end of this year. I've been kind of playing along with it for a while, and it's been a bigger task than I thought originally. So certainly I've been a little bit more busy than I anticipated. But I am moving along with it. So it's going to be a substantial revision and update, because there's been a lot of research and information that's come out since Frischman published that. I think back in the 90s, I think, when that was published. And so we'll keep the same format, but it's going to be a narrower scope. I'm not going to be covering all vertebrates. I'm going to be focusing simply on the commensal rodents. And so I think you'll enjoy it if you're looking for training materials for your staff. That's going to be the book to get. The 2nd edition is available, very low cost. I'm not really making a ton of money on it. Tried to make it as cost effective as possible, because it's still pretty valuable. And again, I'm just updating it into the 3rd edition, and it should be available out as an ebook as well for those of you that are looking for that. All right, enough of that particular advertising. Let me get my PowerPoint here, and I wanted to talk about roof rats today and try to do a little roof rat refresher. So let me get this set up here. All right, I think you should be able to see that straight away. Well, we're going to dealing with roof rats. Of course, the scientific name is Rattus rattus. So Rattus rattus is the scientific name. Rat, I guess, is one way to look at it, but it also has some common names, and so it can be a little confusing. It can be called a roof rat, of course, a black rat, and a ship rat. So it kind of depends on what part of the world you're in or who you're reading. And all of those terms refer basically to the same animal. That this Rattus rattus, this roof rat, typically is what we call it here in the United States, but it's also known as the black rat as well. What is the range of this particular animal? Well, if you see the yellow highlighting lines here, it's primarily in warmer regions of the world, although you can see it up there in Iceland. Iceland gets kind of cold, and it moves around on ships. Of course, it's been named the ship rat. It is the same species that basically is responsible for spreading plague. So it had fleas that carried the bubonic plague that was so devastating and still exists even to this day and still kills people around the world. And so the United States, we have it. It tends to be focused in the southern tier of the United States and, of course, along the coastline. I've heard a report that we've had a roof rat here in Montana, but it probably just hopped a ride from a train, likely from maybe Washington State. So we have no endemic populations. We do have Norways. Norways have a wider range in the world, but the roof rat's pretty, I found a lot of your islands. Of course, my map here doesn't cover a lot of the islands of the Pacific, and so the roof rat is often in those. And of course, you can see it's pretty widely distributed, but primarily along the coastline and in warmer regions of the world. What are some characteristics of this particular species? It's not always black, so this is one of the problems, of course, with common names. Call it the black rat, but it's not always black, so don't simply rely on coloration because color can change. I mean, just think of it like your own hair. You know, you may have had really beautiful dark brown or maybe black hair in your youth, and as you get older, all of a sudden it's gray, and you're like, what happened? Well, coloration can change. Well, certainly with wildlife as well, coloration can change depending on certain genetic issues, of course. It is often a arboreal species, in other words, which is just a fancy word meaning roof rats typically like to climb, and so they can be found in trees. They tend to pick areas with dense cover, which makes sense. They want to stay away from predators, and in warmer areas with a lot of leaf would make it cooler. Now, rats typically lose a lot of heat to the surrounding environment, but of course, if the temperature is always, in the 90s plus, well, it's pretty hard to lose a lot of heat that way. But, believe it or not, they can also be fossorial, again, which is just a fancy word, meaning they can dig in-ground dens, just like the Norway. The Norway rat typically will be denning in the ground or underneath structures, for instance. But the roof rat will do that as well. So, and sometimes they can use those dens around the same period, where they'll use a nest in a tree at one period of time and then move to a ground burrow at another period of time. So don't just assume that if it's a ground burrow, if you're in roof rat territory, that it's just a Norway. That's not always the case. So there does seem to be some evidence that when Norways and roof rats occupy the same area, typically roof rats will be high, Norway rats will be low. But I would love to hear comments from those of you that are doing a lot more field work if you're in roof rat areas. I'd love to get your comments on that. You can certainly respond on our Facebook page with the Pest Geek Podcast. We'd love to have you send some pictures out there and talk about it. I'm always looking for photos. For those of you that are looking to make a little extra side money, I would love to purchase the use rights, not ownership. I won't own your photo. I'm just looking for the right to use your photo. You can definitely reach out to me again at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I'm looking for scat, for damage, for photos of sets of the animal. And your cell phone, it can really take some great shots if you hold it still and you really focus on what you're doing, and you can really take some good shots with the contemporary cell phones, to be sure. And then, of course, lastly, the characteristic of the roof rat is that it's primarily nocturnal. So again, it's safer to come out at night, it's cooler to come out at night, and roof rats will like to come out at night. So just like many rats do. But never underestimate the fact that rats can adapt based on the conditions on the ground. So if an area is very busy at night, it's possible that the rats could simply switch and come out during the day. So, you do what you have to do to survive, right? So when we talk about behavioral characteristics of an animal, we're always talking about sort of averages. And so you need to keep an open mind that sometimes animals can do outlying things. I always refer to it sort of as the crazy uncle syndrome. You have your family may be doing certain things, but then you have that one uncle that just sort of just is a little weird. And so the same way with wildlife can do things outside of the norm as well. And so you want to make sure you keep an open mind in regards to that. Now, in terms of size, roof rats can be kind of a slender animal. So these information is for roof rats out in the Pacific island area, and they found that their weight tended to be a little bit higher than 5 ounces for an adult. Males are significantly larger than females, and of course, body length. And when we talk about body length, we're referring to the length of an animal from the tip of its nose to the base of its tail. Total length is the tip of the nose to the end of the tail, last vertebrate of the tail. So you want to make sure you keep those two terms separate, body length versus total length. Total length includes the length of the tail, where body length does not. Ears will be large enough to cover the eyes. So if you take the ears and bend them down, you will be able to cover the eyes of the roof rat. If you're dealing with a Norway, their ears are not large enough to do that. So, I think of kind of Mickey Mouse, right? So the Mickey Mouse ears are going to be big enough to cover the eyes if you bend them over. So it's kind of a nice field way of determining what kind of species you're dealing with. And then lastly, understand that the roof rat's tail is 16% longer than the body. So another technique, and use them both, right? Obviously with the animal being dead and you're wearing gloves, okay? I hope that I don't have to keep repeating this type of PPE in my podcast, but I guess I should in case someone's coming in late to the show here, right? And this is their first one. So you always want to make sure you're wearing your proper PPE and your gloves. Animals carry diseases, and some of those can be transmitted to you. So animals are dirty. Don't touch that without some sort of protection. So if you take the tail and bend it over the back of the animal, it should touch the tip of the nose. If it doesn't, then it's going to be a Norway rat. If it does, then it's going to be a roof rat. Okay, we're dealing here with North America. Now, those of you in our audience that are out in the Pacific area, you understand that you have other rats like the Polynesian rat and so on. I'm not talking about those. I'm primarily talking about how to identify these rodents within the North American context, okay? So things can maybe different elsewhere. So another way to do it pictorially in terms of distinguishing between the roof rat and the Norway rat, notice that the roof rat tends to be slenderer. It has a sleeker body, what you think squirrel, where a Norway rat is stockier with a blunter nose rather than a pointed nose. And also the eyes of the roof rat tend to be buggier. Think of like with a difference between a deer mouse and a house mouse. Deer mice have buggy eyes. House mouse have much, their eyes are not so buggy. Same way with the roof rat. Roof rats tend to have very buggy eyes, where the Norway rat does not. The tail, of course, is going to be longer than the length of the body for the roof rat. That is not the case for the Norway rat. So that should help you keep these animals straight. Now, in terms of control, the principles for controlling Norways and the principles for controlling roof rats, they overlap a substantial amount. So when we get to the control methods, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. But this presentation, this podcast, is not about control at this time. We're simply going over the life history and biology and identification of this particular animal. When it comes to scat, of course, some commentators talk about a banana type shape to the scat of the roof rat. So there certainly is a little bit of debate about that, nevertheless, but here's a kind of a range in terms of the length of the scat when you were dealing with rodents. But again, all these rodent scats have this sort of tubular shape, maybe a little blunter on one end and a little pointier on the other. But that's common of scats. So it's certainly going to be larger than a mouse, for instance. And of course, location may help you identify it as well. Now, is there a formula for identifying and distinguishing Norway rat scat from roof rat scat? Yes. However, it's not foolproof. However, it can be helpful if you're looking to use this. Now, for those of you outside of the North American context or the European context, this particular system probably won't work for you, because another publication that I looked at cited some work that was done in 2005, which said you really can't use these calculations to conclusively identify what type of invasive rat you're dealing with. But again, and when you're dealing with the Pacific area, you're dealing with a broader range of rats than we are in the U.S. and in the U.K. So I would suspect, I haven't found anything that contradicted this particular publication by Hewson and Davis, but notice how this chart works. And so you have to do a little bit of math. Remember when you said algebra wasn't going to be needed for you in your adulthood? Well, not true, right? Here's an example. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your scat and you're going to measure the length with a caliper down to the 1/10 of a centimeter, to the nearest 1/10 of a centimeter. Then you're going to take that measurement of the length and the width. And so with the length, you're going to multiply that number by 0.105. And then with the width, you're going to multiply that by 1.913. And then you're going to add those two numbers together. And you're going to add 0.5 to that number as well. And so that's going to give you y. If you find that the y, your answer, is greater than 0.5, then you're going to suspect it is Rattus norvegicus. That's the Norway rat. If it is not greater than 0.5, then you're going to suspect that it's a roof rat. Now, what if you have more than 2 pellets? If you have 2 or more pellets, then you can calculate the value of each pellet using the equation y equals length divided by the cube of the width. Again, measuring to the nearest 1/10 of a centimeter. So you're going to have a caliper to do this. You're going to add all the y values and divide by the number of pellets. And if the result is greater than 20, you're going to suspect that it's a Rattus norvegicus, a Norway rat. If the number is, if there is a result greater than 20, if the answer is no, then you have to suspect Norway. If the result is greater than 20, then you're going to suspect roof rat. If you have 5 or more pellets, according to these researchers, your confidence level, that means how certain can you be that you've identified the right species here, of 95%. So that's pretty good. And so you should be able to look at other behavioral type clues to help narrow that out. Now, do most of us need this? Probably not to this level. But if you're in a pinch, remember, being a professional means you handle those outliers, right? That's what makes a difference between a professional and just a regular person. Professional knows how to handle the outlying, the rarer occurrence events. That's what makes you the professional. That's why you're listening to the Pest Geek podcast, Living the Wildlife. Why? Because you're wanting to improve your skills, because we learn at the margins. You don't want me talking about the same stuff every day. Here's how you set a rat trap. Here's how you set a mouse trap. You're like, Steven, you're boring me. I already know how to do all that, right? So we're looking here at the marginal level. And so this is where you're going deep dive. You're getting geeky, which is what we do here at the Pest Geek podcast. So what are some of the abilities of the roof rat? Well, they have a good sense of smell, just like all of your commensal rodents. They have an exceptional sense of touch. Again, those vibricity. Remember, this is an animal that walks around in the dark, right? So they got to be able to feel their way through the darkness. They also have very good hearing, which makes sense with those Mickey Mouse ears that we talked about. Their vision is sensitive to light, of course, but it's not that good in terms of its acuity. They're not able to really identify a lot of objects far away. So you're not dealing with hawk-like eyesight here, right? And they do have some incredible ability to jump. So they're quite agile this way. So all roof rats, a juvenile on up, can jump at least 15 inches vertically. And some are able to leap up even up to 5 feet, which totally blew my mind. So I would assume that's a pretty probably a good mature male, probably would be my guess, who's quite agile. So that's quite a jump to go 5 feet. So I don't know what the research didn't tell me, whether that was like from a height or whether that was from a vertical jump up, but that's pretty impressive. Other physical characteristics in terms of identification of these animals, just like many rodents, they have 4 toes on the front feet, 5 toes on the back feet. They do have claws. Roof rats are very good climbers. Think of them as squirrels without the bushy tail. And that's a good way to probably think about roof rats. They're squirrels without the beautiful bushy tail. Females tend to have, usually, you want to put that, was kind of a weird thing for me to read, that usually they have 10 nipples. And all roof rats have 16 teeth, which is just a little factoid there for you. If you ever find a skull, count the teeth. If it's 16, you might be dealing with a roof rat. Okay. Reproduction, of course, they can reproduce pretty well. Sexual maturity is in 2 to 4 months. Gestation, that is the period of time that a female takes the embryo and brings it to birth. How long is the female pregnant? Okay, so that's 20 to 22 days. Not very long. How long does she nurse the young? Well, 21 to 29 days. And so basically think about a month. So if she gives birth today, 30 days from now, those young will be out and about. How many litters? Well, 4 to 6, and litter size is anywhere from 3 to 6. So a lot of variation, likely based on temperature, time of year, how much food is available, how healthy the female is. So there's some factors involved there. But again, they can reproduce pretty well. Why? A lot of things eat rats. So they need a higher reproductive rate in order to keep their populations around. Where do they den? Well, as I said before, they can den in trees, of course, and they can den in burrows, and they can use both. One publication I looked at said half of the rats that they were studying used both trees and burrows during their study period. Pretty impressive. And they prefer to travel under the protection of dense vegetation. So again, when you're thinking about in urban areas, where do you want to put your traps? Where would you want to put your bait stations? Think about where's the animal traveling? Where does it need to go to get back to its den, if you can identify where its den is, and then ask the question, which area is under the most cover? Not what's the shortest route, what has the most protection, because it doesn't do any good to get there fast if you're dead. Diet. What do these animals eat? Well, plants and vertebrates, and fungi. So roof rats have an omnivore type diet, so they can eat a lot of different things. Now, that being said, the research shows that they will eat plants 9 times more than other food materials in terms of some sort of animal diet. So 9 times. So they're primarily vegetarian, but they're not completely vegetarian. They will eat insects, they will eat vertebrates, it's animals with the spine, and they will even eat fungi as well. Now, of the plants, they tend to seem to have a little bit of a sweet tooth. They like fruit. Probably the moisture in it, and of course the sugar from the fructose is something that really gets them going. So those are some things you want to be thinking about in terms of your habitat modification, asking your client to remove food sources so that you can add a little stress to that animal's life to make it more likely for them to be feeding on any type of rodenticide that you're using, or make them more vulnerable to your trapping if you're using trapping, or both for that matter. Disease, of course, all wildlife have diseases, and of course rats are no different here, nor is the roof rat any special. We've talked about plague before. The roof rat was the rat associated with the transmission of the flea that brought bubonic plague to the Middle Ages of Europe, and which killed millions and millions of people. So it was a staggering amount of death that occurred with Black Plague. By the way, plague is still with us today, so don't assume that it's just sort of a thing of the past. Particularly those of you who live in the West, the arid West, know that plague is very much alive, including in California as well. But other diseases that may not be quite well known to you, that is leptospirosis, and this is spread through the urine of a rat, and I think it can also be transmitted by the bite of this rat. Leptospirosis, often also called whale's disease, is a bacterial infection that can really do some serious damage to you if you get a bad case of it. So certainly something. This is why you're wearing your PPE, why you're wearing your gloves, and because contaminated water, it's going to be transmitted through cracks in your skin and this sort of thing. So it's certainly something to pay attention to. Not only are there ectoparasites that brought the plague, like with your fleas, but also there are endoparasites, parasites on the inside of the rodent. This is particularly the case out in Hawaii. If we have any of the audience out there in Hawaii, understand that roof rats can carry rat lungworm, which is certainly an issue, and that is something that causes a problem. It's their eating of those snails where they get this lungworm inside of it, and I guess they can help transmit it as well. But there's also raccoon roundworm, which is interesting. An interesting article that came out of from a researcher out of California showed that roof rats tended to forage around raccoon latrines. Of course, why are they doing that? Well, raccoons are defecating a lot of seeds in their feces, and so probably the roof rats are foraging through that, and they're picking up the raccoon roundworm into their own system. And this researcher believed that rats can serve as a reservoir for this particular worm and therefore shed it elsewhere as well and help contaminate the environment. So we talk about raccoon roundworm as being associated with raccoons, which it is, but understand it's also infects and is associated with a wide variety. I think the number I saw was somewhere around 151, if memory serves, different animals associated with raccoon roundworm. So don't get too narrow-minded. Oh, raccoon roundworm, just raccoons. No, that's not good. Raccoons are certainly a major host of this particular infection, but other animals can carry it as well, and certainly the roof rats are part of that. Well, that's enough of our little survey of roof rat biology and care, and so I hope you've enjoyed that. Again, my contact information is wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, and I'm really glad that you were able to listen to this podcast today. And again, I'd love to hear from you if you have suggestions, criticisms, comments. Perhaps you want to be interviewed for the show, perhaps you have a particular publication, or perhaps you have a particular product or service that you're hoping to get out there, or just talk about your business and talk about getting your name out there. By all means, reach out to me. I'd be happy to interview you. I don't do gotcha journalism, so I'm pretty tame in terms of my interviews. I like to have my guests talk more than I do, because I'm talking all the time when I'm here alone, of course. Do take the time this week, of course, to be safe. Make sure you rest over the weekend and get yourself refreshed, and then get to it on Monday. So thank you very much for listening. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife. And why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.